The goal of Data Transformers podcast is to accelerate digital transformation by bridging the gap between business outcomes and rapidly advancing technologies. And we aim to bridge this gap by focusing on data. I am Peggy Tsai, top 50 women in tech influencer, co-author of the AI book, and data governance expert.
I'm Ramesh Danta, an entrepreneur, a tech blogger, and AI enthusiast.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Data Transformers. I'm so pleased to have with us today Cortnie Abercrombie, the CEO and founder of AI Truth for AI ethics and responsible AI. She's also named one of the 12 brilliant women in artificial intelligence and ethics to watch, and also top 100 innovators in data and analytics. So pleased to have you, Cortnie, with us today.
Thanks for having me. I've been following you, Peggy, online as well.
Thank you. We're mutual admirers of each other. Yes.
Welcome, Cortnie. So I think Peggy could have gone a lot more introducing you. There are so many accolades that are out there. So yeah, so congratulations.
Yeah, then we would falsely build people's hopes, and we don't want to do that. So we're all just people. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses.
We'll focus on the strengths today, Cortnie. I mean, really, you're a recognized AI and data analytics expert. Let's just first talk about, your company, AI Truth. Just the words AI and ethics today. These are two really loaded words. How can we have ethics around AI? I mean, the difficulty of enforcing ethics and having a code of conduct around AI is such a large conversation. I mean, I'd love to first start off, Cortnie. Where do you begin understanding and putting a structure around this area in place?
Well, I would say the very first thing that has to happen, which a lot of companies haven't done, is to really look at your AI strategy as a whole, not just your AI strategy, but honestly, you've got to take a look at what matters to you as a company as a whole. So if there are policies in place, if you, for example, value diversity and inclusion as a company as a whole, then you need to value diversity and inclusion in your AI as well. Everything that matters to you and your brand and your company and your reputation, everything that matters to your customers, those are all things that you need to make sure come through in your AI strategy. And as part of that, then you would start your AI ethics journey as part of your AI strategy journey. And your AI strategy really should be an extension of what you're trying to do in general for your customers, right? So I just start with the holistic approach. Like it's the same thing as like you wouldn't steal $20 off the ground from somebody. If someone dropped $20, you'd probably pat them on the back and say, hey, you just dropped $20. If you wouldn't steal $20 digitally from somebody online just because you could, then you probably shouldn't let your AI do that either, right? And you got to make sure that you've got safeguards in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Whether it's the $20 or whether it's, which is more, that people don't want to lose money, but, or it's someone's security, or it's someone, I mean, if you know secrets about someone and you're the kind of person that you probably wouldn't out those secrets to everybody, well, then don't do it online, and definitely don't let your AI strategy do that. And make sure that you go through with a fine-tooth comb and understand what your AI is doing, how it's doing it. And those are the things that are hard because, one, there's a whole culture in place, right? Yeah. That kind of prevents a whole lot of question asking. Well, there's a culture of, hey, I'm the data scientist, I'm fantastic. Mm-hmm. And you just, Mr. or Mrs. Chief Digital Officer or whatever you are, just follow my lead because I'm the expert here in machine learning. So I've got the PhD and you've got the marketing degree. You stay in your lane and I'll stay in my lane, and don't ask me a lot of questions. So there's a cultural aspect that if I ask questions that somehow I am thwarting your position or your role or your authority, right? But then there's another aspect too to this, that there's a lot of people who pay for AI don't. There's a huge gap, and this is why I use this little diagram so much. But this is like, let's say this example is a chief marketing officer and they want some kind of AI driven social media command centers. Those are very popular with marketing folks, right? You want social media analytics as much as you can. But there's a little pod of data science people here that's working with you on this. And you probably don't understand half of what goes on in data engineering and data munging, for example. You probably have no clue what it takes to source data. Like if I need, and this is a really funny one, but it's one for tractors, right? So it's funny because people don't think of John Deere as being like some kind of really advanced. When you think of tractors, what do you think about, right?
Yeah, John Deere,
You're thinking of farmers. Yeah.
And also you think of a legacy company, a manufactured company, right?
Yeah. But I mean, in the past anyway, until I knew about how advanced John Deere is about, with their equipment, they actually have pieces of equipment that can identify heads of cabbage, for crying out loud, and whether it's good or bad, and put it in the wagon for making food out of it, or just leave it behind and it'll become ground up into the ground or whatever. But that's how sophisticated even farming is today, much less, and it uses AI. But to get back to the data sourcing, how do you get pictures of heads of lettuce and cabbage to know what's the good cabbages and what are the bad cabbages? There's some group sitting in India most of the time, sometimes now more than ever before, also in Africa. There's a lot of people. I don't know if you've read the Ghost Work and all of that. The book. It's on the AI Truth reading list. So if you want to go look it up, but there's people behind how you get a lot of the data, right? Because somebody's got to be labeling all of this stuff.
Correct.
The correct thing. In some cases, when we talk about healthcare cases, it's doctors. They have to say, and image diagnostic folks. So they have to say, yep, that's breast cancer, right? This little part right here in this image is the actual, but there's all this labeling that goes on. And today, data sourcing by itself, I call these people informally, when I talk to just regular folks, like people you'd meet at the post office, I tell them these are like the data librarians. Like everybody knows what a librarian is, right? You tell them, hey, I'm trying to find this. And then they say, okay, let me go. I think I've got several books on that. Well, in this case, these people say, I need heads of cabbage, or I need people like this, and this that I'm trying to find. In the case of a personal, let me put it back in context of the social media environment, right? You're normally going to have some kind of customer that you're targeting in this particular context of that scenario, right? So you're going to go to these data sourcing people and you're going to say, find me some people that are like this, like I'm picking down a Chinese menu, right? And then they're going to go and they're going to figure that out. And then they're going to come back and they're going to work with data scientists who are data engineers whose specific job is to just munge that data to get it into formats that work. They may munge like several different sources of data, usually set up in an application interface of some sort, so that they can just stream it down. Now, and that's where, believe it or not, 90% of what goes wrong is with data, because it's either the training data that you brought in and you sourced,
or labeling data,
or you made up data because you couldn't find heads of cabbages that were wrong, 5 ways to Sunday messed up, or somebody in India who's never seen a cabbage before was like, well, this kind of looks like okra. I don't know, or some, I don't know. You can correct me, but
that's true.
But it's like, and because we have people in other cultures labeling a lot of what gets used in the United States, where they don't even know sometimes what they're like, what am I looking at? But I'm getting paid to do this job, so I must put something, right?
So you're bringing up really, an excellent point about different cultures participating in the preparation of AI. So recently we spoke to one guest. He mentioned the two cases, Courtney. One case is where mortgage applications, right? So the data that is there, to some extent, is biased, right? With humans looking at the applications and then figuring out, right? So, and then you fed that into AI, then obviously it gave you predictions based on that one aspect of it. The second aspect of it, if the training data is based on one class of people, right? It could be Caucasians, it could be depending on the culture or whatever, right? So and then you use that, like it's a facial recognition as an example, right? So then all your training data is based on a certain class of people, certain section of people, certain culture people, and then you apply that to a different section, then obviously it's going to give you a wrong outcome. So given these challenges, where do you think, Courtney, who is accountable for making sure that the ethics and then the responsible AI is in place in organizations?
Now, this is the key question. Who is responsible? And I've got a long list of things that we could talk about. And I'm going to just put this is like my very technical version of things, right? But my handwritten version of things. But all of those things I listed, sometimes there are responsible people to rectify situations.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there aren't. Sometimes there are accountability people. Sometimes there aren't. Yeah. In this, the first thing you have to do to even understand where things are going on going wrong, is you have to figure out, well, how do things get done inside of the companies that are having these bias problems on a regular basis? And then when you figure out the process that they undertake, which is the approach that I've taken. So a lot of academics just talk about the problems, but they don't talk about the problems in context of how is this getting played out inside the business. And part of my job at IBM was, to go around, fly around to all of these Fortune 500 companies and understand exactly how do they do what they do, and did we want to invest in it to scale to the whole of the industry? So like, for example, the social media command centers, that was one of the things that I flew on site to visit with data scientists and their chief digital officers and understand how were they using these, how did they set them up, who in their organizations were doing what parts, and how did it get done? And how did they work back and forth with the main funder of the project? So the people who fund the projects don't always know what goes into the project, the data. Remember, cabbages or whatever. They have no idea. If someone made up purple cabbages because they couldn't find purple cabbages, they don't know if, they don't know what happened over here. Correct. To be able to even say. So could we even say these people are responsible? Yes, because we know they fund this, right? So we have to look at each person's role, and this even down to the product manager, building enough time in to evaluate more about the data sourcing. Even that person developing, the data scientist specifically involved with the development of the algorithm is responsible. So when you add, even the person who comes up with the design thinking, the UX design, the people who will kickstart the process, if we're lucky, by saying, let's evaluate use cases for what you want to achieve. Because sometimes chief marketing officers, and insert any executive, it could be a chief financial officer, it could be a chief operations officer, it could be anybody. It's usually a chief because they have the money. Right. But they've usually got some kind of initiative, like I want to do more with personal experience, or I want to monitor trends and be more reactive with social media, or it starts with those kinds of goals. And then it works into, okay, now how do we manifest those goals into some kind of AI initiative or use case? And what often happens is, even at the design level, people should say, is this a use case we should pursue with AI? Mm-hmm. Sometimes, even from the very get-go, it's a big fat nope. Yeah. It's too subjective and we don't have enough data. Like sometimes you have to say, okay, team, you know what data is available without lying and making up data and using tons of proxies that are inappropriate to use. Would we be able to viably pull off whatever this use case is and the goal of the use case? And could we not just viably pull it off, but could we pull off the use case in a way that actually does more good than potential harm? And what I mean is, if, for example, I want to, real scenario, cigarette companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it harmful to try and help them target heavy smokers?
Yeah.
Mm.
Is it? Are you going to do more harm by identifying people who are heavy smokers and potentially leaving that data in the cloud? Because let's just face it, everything that you want to do is going to be in the cloud on an API.
Yeah, I think another relevant example is the opioid crisis, right? So right?
Yes,
so
perfect.
yeah, so you target people, the companies targeted who were already abusing opioids, and then you kept selling more and more into it, and then if AI were to be used, I don't believe it was, right? But how bad the situation could have been.
Yes, could you inadvertently end up harming the very people that you're trying to target? Could you end up inadvertently harming them, like by having them as a list even? Because what health insurer wouldn't want that list of heavy smokers? Or, who wouldn't want to try and trigger them more to up their usage or whatever even more? Or, anyway, there's
Courtnie, actually, sorry, I have a follow-up on that one, which is, given that the business tendency is to maximize the business outcomes, whatever they may be, right? Maximize profit, maximize revenues, lower costs, right? All of those things. So that is the fundamental focus. So their natural tendency, taking this opioid crisis as an example, there were many companies involved, and then a lot of companies paid big fines, right? Because they were maximizing profits, maximizing revenues, right? So, and then the ethical considerations went out the door. So that is the natural phenomenon. So given that situation in AI, right? I mean, how can you insert this responsible AI ethics from get-go? Like, who is managing it? Who is controlling it? I mean, what can you, as an advisor or coach, I mean, what should companies do? It should be the government regulations, only governments can regulate it, or is there a place for companies to somehow regulate it?
This is the thing. It comes back to culture, right? So there's a couple of things in capitalist culture, which that's US.
Yes, so US and Western world, and actually most of the world as well. Yeah.
Yeah. In capital culture, they often, at the highest executive ranks, you kind of got to get into the heads of CEOs, right? And I used to run CEO roundtables, and so I've heard a lot of the conversation that happens. And of course, they consider an ethical responsibility to be fiduciary responsibility. And we all know what but let's just boil down what is fiduciary responsibility, and should it compete with other ethical considerations? Because fiduciary responsibility is just, I have a set of investors, they've invested money, and I am supposed to try and make them as much money as I can. And what we've seen in capitalist society is that fiduciary responsibility competes with ethical, humanistic concerns, right? And what we're watching and what we've been seeing is that often this has just been getting more and more and more and more from a middle spectrum to off the charts greed spectrum at this point. We're just seeing unprecedented salaries for CEOs. Back in the 70s, it was more like this. Now it's just you're so far away from regular employees, you probably have no clue what affects regular people anymore.
The gap is,
go ahead, Peggy.
No, the gap is certainly widening. So
but we've seen that what governs a lot of the C-suite really is that fiduciary responsibility, because also they're incented that way, right? Because the more they make for Wall Street or whatever their investors are, and even private companies usually have a set of investors that they're trying to pay back, right? I mean, so we've seen that gets taken as much more important because there's also bonuses and incentive structures and
Correct.
easy to measure. It's just easy to measure money. It's money. So it's harder to measure people's quality of life, and it's harder to tackle the things that don't have a monetary value or that aren't easily measured.
Yeah.
Like, do we have enough diversity and inclusion? What's the way that people measure that? They don't have a metric for inclusion, by the way, but they have a metric for diversity. Did we hire enough of those people?
Yeah.
Yes, check. But did we actually include them in any of our decision making that matters?
That's a tough one.
That's too hard to measure.
Right.
There's no bonus attached to that. There's no, and so, and there's also not a culture of that, of really thinking about how are we widening the gap as different companies, and what's happening to regular people. There's no incentive for any executives to take that on, and it's too hard.
That's very true.
I think it's also very hard to measure. I know recently Starbucks started to tie their executive bonuses to diversity and inclusion, but again, it's whether or not the actual diversity of their workforce is included in the decision making is different than actual hiring, Cortnie. So agree with you there. I actually wanted to take it back to some earlier comments you made. Really the first question around AI ethics ties back to data, or ultimately itself, because you kind of walked us through to AI ethics ties to strategy, ties to the actual data itself. And it sounded like the actual foundation in order to do and execute on good AI ethics boils down to a good data management program. Is that?
Absolutely. And look who's left out over here in the cold: chief data officers, chief legal officers. When I first left IBM and I announced I was on great terms, by the way, so you don't have to worry about that or anything. But when I left and I was expecting to hear from all my chief data officer friends, and who I heard from instead when I announced I was leaving to do AI ethics was legal officers, compliance officers, risk, people like that. And the reason is they are worried about what they're not involved in. And as I went through my journey of kind of being like this AI Shark Tank executive within IBM, looking for all these solutions, I rarely saw data officers involved. And there was no rigor around how data gets done on these teams. As a matter of fact, let me tell you how bad the situation is. The situation is so bad. So these lead data scientists, their whole goal in life is to do some magnificent off the charts project that they can list on a resume. It'll be done, and they want to be done with the company in anywhere from 12 to 24 months tops. So they're not doing something to stay. They're doing something so that they can go on to the next big thing, whatever that is, a big Google job, a big Uber job, a big whatever. But they'll start inside corporations because those are easier to get started on, and make your name with, and then you move up and move up and move up. So these guys are going to move on. They don't have an interest in documenting data. They have little junior data scientists. Well, that undermines their job. I'm sorry. They have very up and coming, ambitious junior data scientists, real junior data scientists, people who know how to do machine learning is what I mean, and do coding.
Yeah.
Not your citizen data scientist, not your business analyst person, but a person who truly knows how to do like machine learning and algorithm creation, and model creation specifically. So you have these people here, and then you have these application developers, and these people, they just don't. They don't have an interest in keeping any kind of data management records. As a matter of fact, I don't want to give away names, but the head of a very, very well-used algorithm that we all have scores of it, financial scores. He even has a hard time making people who come into his organization, and it's a very public algorithm, right? We all know about financial scores. And even he has a hard time getting data scientists who will agree to document what they've munched together, how they munched it together, keep track of what that data source was at that moment. He's even using blockchain to try and do it. This is no small thing. And the people who know how to do that stuff the best are those chief data officers.
Yeah, they're the ones
They
all about
see it as a slowdown.
Yeah,
I mean, more than that's, you're making us slow down. We are on MVP and agile, and we don't have time for you to stand in our way and tell us we need to document everything that we're doing, because we got to get an MVP out the door in 6 to 8 weeks. That's what I've heard.
That's all the
slowing us down, data people. You're slowing us down.
But that's where the conflict is, right? Where CDOs and data management teams are all about documentation and lineage and sourcing and ensuring good quality data is being used. And then, as you said, there's a whole science team who just wants to deliver really quick.
So, to your point, Peggy, these people, what I was going to say, how bad it was, I've seen these people retire $1 million algorithms because they have, when this person leaves, the lead data scientist, because they have no way of knowing what went in it. They can't answer questions about how it works. And as we all know, AI and algorithms are not a set it and forget it. You got to go back in, take a look, govern it. When some kind of API breaks or they update it constantly, which, let's face it, that's what they do. That's what APIs are all about. They just constantly update those things, right? Yeah. Or internally, when you're using it in an enterprise resource planning system, like, let's look at Salesforce, for example. If you're using it, because marketing officers, right? You want to use customer relationship management software with this, and it's in the cloud. So why can't you just use it, your sprinklers and of the world, and your, all the ones that are managing all your channels and things. You want to be able to use all those things together. But if any one part of that breaks, or the data isn't coming through in the same way that you expected it to, your algorithm is going to suddenly be like, oh, well, when that data shifted or it changed formats or whatever it did, suddenly your algorithm won't be picking up pieces of data from particular API sets, which means you could have whole groups of people. Maybe one of those data feeds was to get more diversity. Let's say maybe it was African-American students or something that you were trying to make sure were part of your feed coming in to make sure you had diversity. Well, if suddenly that breaks in your system, you have no representation of them. And then suddenly your algorithm, what it's learning, has shifted. Now it's like suddenly it's just all back to picking, I guess, white people for that particular job or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll say it's AI and hiring is the use case. I don't know. It depends on the use case and what kind of data. But
Cortnie, actually, you're bringing up a point which, in my opinion, AI is exacerbating, because if I go back and look at it, programming was like that. There are people who would not document, right? As a result, you hear stories on the Wall Street and the financial world, the programs that were written for mainframes in COBOL language, right? No documentation. So they have to keep maintaining those systems forever and ever. And then I hear this funny story about COBOL programmers are the most difficult ones to get, right now, because the financial world needs, but AI is exacerbating that situation because the models are black boxes. The data scientists themselves, they might see that and they don't want documented. They might see value in not documenting because, their value goes up in all those human factors, as a matter of fact. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard today and would like to hear more, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite player like iTunes and Spotify. And please do rate our podcast. Also, please go to our website, www.datatransformerspodcast.com, for more episodes, blogs, and information on our speakers. Thank you.